music? China? What are they even saying? What is this Chinese rap music? Sounds like they're just saying ching chang chong.
My chance noodle watch made in China. We play ping pong ball made in China.
Hello and welcome to China Econ Talk, a sub-China podcast in the Sinica network. So, why should anyone care about Chinese tech stocks? What is Bytedance, apparently now the highest valued private company in the world? And what are the future problems they may face? What are some classic examples of Chinese tech companies failing to expand abroad? And what is China's PayPal mafia, and how exactly are they influencing the Chinese tech scene? For all these questions and more, we turn to Elliot Zagman, reporter at TechNode and executive coach for Chinese tech founders. Elliot, so great to have you on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Jordan. It's good to be here.
So word on the street is that you're dropping a new podcast of your own.
Yeah, man. It just dropped. Well, kind of. It's in the process of dropping.
Okay.
Depending on how you consume your podcast.
You want to do a little pitch for it? So what's
Yeah.
the topic? What's the title?
By the time that this podcast comes out, it should be on all platforms. But the name of the podcast is the China Tech Investor. So I'm co-hosting it with James Hull. James Hull is a portfolio manager here in Beijing. And between the two of us, we have about 20 years altogether of experience in China, and working with and around either the Chinese tech or financial industry. The reason why we decided to go into this topic, one is that both of us are investors in stocks and tech stocks and in Chinese tech stocks. We're very interested in it. And I think in addition to that, business operates by a different set of rules in China, right? So if you apply all the rules of investing in the US or with a Silicon Valley tech stock to a Chinese tech stock, it may not apply. So we don't have all the answers, but we're looking for the answers. So we say we are trying to seek truth from facts when it comes to the world of China tech investing. And we invite our listeners to go along on that quest with us.
Sure. So again, it's called
The China Tech Investor.
Awesome.
Yep.
So let's turn now to the Chinese tech startup that perhaps has had some of the most dramatic success abroad over the past few months, which is Bytedance. Could you walk us through what this company is and what it's been doing overseas?
Okay. Bytedance they do machine learning and content recommendation. And that's kind of their core technology, right? And then they can basically organize that around any kind of content. Right, so they started off with Jinru Toutiao, today's headline, which is basically a news recommendation app, which is China's most popular news recommendation app. They find out they're able to gather enough data very quickly about a user to identify their consumption patterns, and then recommend stuff for them. So they've had their app in China, their news app, Jinru Toutiao, has been quite addictive. And so I think the average user spends almost an hour a day on it. Yeah. I don't have the number, in front of me, but it's somewhere around there. Which if you think that, they have a large user base in China and they have an hour's worth of their eyeballs, that's
extraordinary.
That's really good, yeah. And then they've expanded. Where they've had a lot of their growth recently is in short video. So they have, in China it's called Douyin. Abroad it's called TikTok. They acquired Musical.ly, which is a China-based, but it got successful in the U.S. mostly with like 12, 13, 14-year-olds.
Yes.
Lip syncing to songs, and they basically took that model and basically went all in on it, and that's what Douyin is, and that's what TikTok is. It's basically kind of a reformatted Musical.ly.
Yeah.
So yeah, they've had really good growth, especially in places like Southeast Asia. People like to use that.
There was a great article recently by Raymond Zhong in the Times interviewing these young users from all around Asia outside of China. And the reporter clearly asked them, did you know this was a Chinese brand? And none of them had any clue. From South Korea, from Indonesia, from Japan, from the US as well. So it's really interesting how it seems like the best a Chinese company can do is to sort of hide their
Hide their strength and bide their time.
Yeah, please let's skip that. Skip that Chungyu for today. But you've been writing recently on TechNote about some of the issues that they've started to have when it comes to content. As you might expect from any app that has a strong user-based population in the preteen and teen ranges, there's some safety concerns that come up
absolutely.
With those sorts of users.
It's the same kind of problems that a platform like Facebook would have or Instagram. But let's start from the very beginning. I think that what they are is they're kind of like, if you think about all the criticism that Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, YouTube has been getting lately because they use similar content recommendation algorithms. What Bytedance does is they say, let's look at these tactics and let's just crank them up. Let's put them on steroids, which is also why I'm like, why the hell is nobody have a problem with this, right? It's everything that we see that is such a problem with our platforms that we're using, for example, in the States, or that most of the world is using. And Bytedance is like, let's turbocharge that and let's print money.
What's interesting is that, on Twitter, on Instagram, you choose the people you follow. On Facebook, 2/3 of what you see is actually people posting things, right? But what's interesting with Douyin and Jinri Toutiao and TikTok and Top Buzz, the Chinese products, is like it's the same recommendations, but it's all people you don't know making the products.
And they curate it for you. Yeah. Right? Which is,
on the one hand, super entertaining.
Yes.
Like, I'm a huge Douyin fan, spend maybe 20, 30 minutes a day. And the content I get served is like definitely more funny, more interesting, more well produced than like whatever Douyins my friends are making at the time.
Yeah, I mean,
but it also introduces these real issues when it comes to stuff like fake news and child protection that you wrote about recently.
Well, let's start. I want to start from everything I've done this year.
Sure.
So I've basically covered two different problems that the company's platforms have had. One is at the end of last year, because I write, so I was approached by some of the people who run their platform Top Buzz, which is basically Jinri Toutiao, but in English. And they're like, do you want to take some of your content, you can just republish some of your articles, and then we'll pay you 2 cents per click. And I was like, yeah, sure, let's give it a try. And so I tried it a little bit, and I downloaded the app. And I was like, I published a couple articles. It didn't make, I made like $1 per article. So I was like, this is not really worth the time to copy and paste. And so I also was like, this is not really, I don't want kind of my name associated with this platform, because it was a lot of really kind of lowest common denominator, just kind of cheap clickbait stuff.
World star hip hop was my analogy.
Yeah. Okay. But what I also started seeing is, do you remember that election in Alabama with Roy Moore and Doug Jones?
Absolutely.
Right?
My sister was on the campaign trail.
Oh, really?
Knocking on doors.
Yeah. For Roy Moore, I assume?
Who was the good guy? I forgot.
Roy Moore was the pedophile. And,
not the pedophile. Not the pedophile.
I'm joking, yeah. So I got a push notification from them so Doug Jones won the election.
Doug Jones, yes.
Right. Roy Moore was the name, right, because he was this guy who was kind of this firebrand and also had been accused of, being kind of predatory with teenage girls. And I got a push notification that says Roy Moore wins election.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? This is not true, right? But if you think about their algorithm, they're paying for 2 cents a click, and you're trying to make as much money as possible, right? If you have the headline that every other news outlet has, but then you're not going to get a whole lot of clicks.
Yeah.
But if you have the one that, the Dewey defeats Truman, then
people are gonna be like, "What is this real?" Yeah, sure.
Exactly.
If that's all it is just clicks per dollar.
Exactly. If that's the only metric that's deciding whether or not it's getting pushed.
Yeah.
Sure. And then the fake news stuff just started getting out of control with the platform. So I'd get messages that said stuff like, Julia Roberts says that Michelle Obama is not fit to clean Melania Trump's toilet. Right. So what the hell? I mean,
right-wing activist Julia Roberts.
Yes,
That's,
exactly. I look at
from the blind side to the dark side of
that's
the
Sandra
internet.
Bullock. That's it.
Oh no, sorry.
From Pretty
Sorry,
Woman.
Julia.
From Pretty Woman to Breitbart. So they what you could see how this gets made though. It is clickable name, clickable name, clickable name.
Yeah.
Right? That's going to drive traffic. And then incendiary comment. Right? Boom. Gets run out. And then you'd have, like, if you look at their politics channel or their science channel, that's where it was just filled with garbage. It was filled with, is NASA lying to us? The moon is 4 miles from Earth.
Jesus Christ.
Which is, I mean, a 747 doesn't fly, flies more than 4 miles from Earth. Right? Or they'd have something like, it's confirmed Obama travels with a demon in his entourage. And they'd have like this photo of like where something looks kind of shit, foggy next to him. It's like, it's confirmed. It's a demon, right? But just this absolute,
This is worse than World Star.
Yeah.
This is way worse than World
weekly
Star.
world news.
Yeah.
It's the stuff you see in the supermarket checkout line.
Yeah.
It's Hillary Clinton's alien lover.
Right.
It's stuff like that. So I wrote when I first started seeing it, I sent Bytedance, their Top Buzz team, a message. I was like, you guys got to clean this stuff up. And they were like, are you going to write something about this? I was like, I don't plan on doing it right now. I waited a couple months. They didn't clean it up. So I wrote something about it.
Yeah.
Their PR was, and has always been, their in-house PR is always aloof. They don't engage with me that much.
Yeah.
Their third-party PR is, they have a tendency to push and be kind of aggressive, but within
What's there to be aggressive about that? I mean, it's
but they're like, we don't agree with this way that you characterized it, or we want you to add this information about our social responsibility programs, right? And I do, sure.
Yeah.
But they're also they push.
Yeah.
But it's within the parameters of professional behavior.
Sure.
Right. So it is annoying. It's pesky, but it's like you're playing basketball, right? And someone's guarding you really, maybe a little bit aggressive, right? It's annoying. You hope
these people are doing their jobs.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
You hope the ref blows the whistle, but they're not kneeing you in the groin or anything like that, right? So I that article went out. And over a few months, I've been following Top Buzz, and it's still garbage. It's still clickbait, but they get rid of a lot of the fake stuff, right? Which is good. I mean,
great.
but however, like it's still a clickbait platform.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what they do. They pump out garbage.
Okay.
It's what they do is they're McDonald's. You know what I mean? Like they say, okay, what McDonald's says, what is basically your fundamental base lowest common denominator desire, right? So they go to children, right? They go to I love McDonald's, right? My amygdala loves McDonald's,
yeah,
right? My prefrontal cortex knows I shouldn't eat it, right? And that's what Bytedance is, right? Yeah. You shouldn't click on that, right? But your animal brain wants to, right?
I will say in defense of the Douyin product, which is the one that I've used the most, is at this point, the ecosystem is large enough that the amount of content that it has can support like different types of consumption habits. So at this point, like it knows I like history. So it has like all these like really cute, well-produced 2-minute videos about like some crazy emperor from like the Ming Dynasty or something.
Cool.
And there's like, it knows I play badminton. So it has like crazy badminton highlights and like badminton tutorials.
Oh, that's good.
It knows I like, Chinese painting. So it will like teach me how to like paint a flower every 10th video or something. So I think there's a few things going on here. I mean, clearly there's a large amount of the consumer base that is like more than happy living in that universe. But it's also probably the case that like the content ecosystem in the West for TikTok, for Top Buzz isn't quite as rich as maybe what they've been able to build in China.
Yeah, although I mean, have you looked at Junior Toutiao? I mean,
Toutiao, yeah. Toutiao's a different ballgame, I think.
Yeah.
And also it's the sort of thing where like, I don't think I've spent enough time on the Toutiao app for me to teach it that like, I like real news, not like
Right,
people punching
right.
each other and like people getting into fights on the street.
Yeah.
So there's an aspect of where this goes both ways, and like the AI, like their algorithm can only be good as like this, as good as the stuff that it's uploading. So like I spent a few hours, I was back in the States recently. I spent some time on TikTok trying to like the videos that would be sort of more mature and less teens dancing. And it just seemed like there wasn't enough there yet for it to learn that like I liked stuff besides teens dancing. So, you know, this is the sort of thing where like the content is only as good as the platform. And it's not like a search engine where it can pull from everything, you know,
they
around the globe.
They can only pull for what they make. I mean, it's, I see that there are problems. Their mission statement is not let's dump garbage on our users.
There's a great Zhang Yiming, I think it was like a 36KR interview, or maybe it was a piece about him where basically he was portrayed as like this most like controlled kind of like delay satisfaction type of guy. And you know, he didn't take the early investment from Alibaba or Tencent. He was kind of always pushing gratification further and further off. The irony being that his products are the exact opposite, right? So we have this like super self-controlled, like engineering PhD kind of building this product, which is incredibly aimed at, you know, very much aimed at amygdala, instant gratification, never have a second of downtime of boredom. So I imagine there's some part of him that may not be super comfortable with the stuff he's putting out as well.
There was an investor meeting that they had. There was a call and one of the investors asked, like, why is the content so like low grade? So basic, right? So McDonald's, right? And he goes, when we've tried to do world affairs or, you know, the more kind of productive stuff, people don't want to read it. So I mean, it's our fault as much as it is ByteDance's. You know, but
there's a reason BuzzFeed like is valued at a few $1 billion and like the New York Times isn't. Right?
Well, I mean, there's also
a lot of reasons for that, but anyways.
So what ended up happening is I found it's September, August, September, there is this YouTube video blogger. He goes by the name of Pay Money Wubby.
Oh yeah.
And I had never heard of this guy before, and then I had somebody kind of be like, "Hey, you should check this out because you know, I know you write about this company." But he looked at Musical.ly, but before they changed their name to TikTok, it's the same app. They about how you know their influencers get followers, right, and get clicks. And you know, their especially in the US, their core user base is somewhere around like 12, 13, 14 years old, you know, kind of middle school age. And, you know, what do you do if you're trying to get followers? You know, he just goes through it and it's like it's hypersexualized, you know, it's, you know, middle schoolers, you know, singing along to very, you know, kind of provocative songs, not wearing a lot of clothes, you know, that kind of stuff. And basically, you know, he looks at how it's kind of a platform that is ripe for predatory behavior. And there are a lot of, you know, there have been a lot of other videos as well that look at the safety issues, right, when it comes to the kids that are on it, as well as family groups and parents groups in the US that have kind of brought attention to the app. So this guy's video goes viral, like 1.3 million views, and it kind of makes him, right? He gets all these new followers, and then all of a sudden, his video gets taken down, and he gets a copyright strike from YouTube. Right? That ByteDance had filed a complaint. Right? The complaint was in Chinese, right? So it's probably not coming from their international PR; it's coming from their Chinese PR. And it says, you know, you're illegally using our logo. First of all, if it's within YouTube's terms of service if you're doing a review of a product, which he was, you can use their logo. And secondly, there are thousands of videos on YouTube that have ByteDance's
it's like
logo.
These old Vine clips, right? Like funniest Vine of the month. You know, there's the same thing for Musical.ly videos.
Exactly. We know the real reason why they took it down. And then this guy's got a big following on like Reddit and Twitch and all these other platforms. So they complained as well to YouTube. YouTube ended up putting it back up, and it's fine now. So, but I wrote about that, and also
PewDiePie, actually, who does have an enormous following, did another follow-up video kind of on the same theme. I don't know if you came across this.
Oh, really? No, I didn't.
Yeah, just saying like TikTok is kind of gross and weird and confusing.
Oh no, it is super gross and weird. I mean, there's a lot of videos that are about this.
Yeah. So to be fair, again, like there's plenty of
Yes.
15-year-olds on Instagram with very revealing photos,
Right, yeah.
Who also have tens of thousands of followers. I think the issue you have here is like the BAMFA of ByteDance doesn't necessarily seem to be ready to confront these issues abroad.
Well, yeah, and also I think that they're known in China, like Ma Huateng, for the CEO and chairman of Tencent, kind of called them out for, he didn't say them specifically by name, but about the problem of Hei Gongguan, like black PR, which is really common in China, where I just think the standards of behavior, like internet companies in China, they fight harder, I think, and fight dirtier than your standard Silicon Valley company.
Yeah.
And in some ways, that makes it more interesting. That makes it, more fun to write about.
Sure.
But until they come after you, and that's a problem. So ByteDance is known for being on the dirtier side of things with how they do things. This is their reputation, and it's, in some ways, it's kind of how they've had to do it, right? They want to establish themselves independently. They don't want to be part of this, be kind of like, absorbed by the monsters that are Tencent and Alibaba. So they're trying to build themselves up. What do? You have to kind of be a street fighter, right?
Yeah.
So it is, in some ways, it is understandable. But I wrote about them. I wrote about, and I include a whole lot of other cases of, where parents groups have been, concerned in the U.S. about how the Indonesian government blocked them for a while for promoting what they consider to be indecent behavior, and about how, it's really difficult to, even though they don't have to have this kind of, they don't have to set up offices all over the world, but to adapt to all these different internet regulations and different cultural standards abroad is a tricky thing.
Yeah,
right?
And it's something that Facebook and Google haven't figured out with
Yes, exactly.
years and years more of experience and a more international workforce and more revenue.
Yeah.
So this is a challenge that everyone's facing, and that given the speed of the success of TikTok, they're running into at a pace that no other Chinese tech firm has really had to confront.
Exactly, and just all new problems that they are not used to dealing with.
Sure.
Right. But I would also say another argument that I would give. I mean, they have very powerful core technology, and they could be doing just about anything with it.
Yeah. Right.
And there's a whole lot of areas where people need really good recommendations. Right. But compare it with YouTube, compare it with Twitter, compare it with Facebook. YouTube, yes, has a lot of, crap on it, until recently it had a lot of Alex Jones or, just this kind of, conspiracy theory stuff. They have problems with that, but they also have, what if the world didn't have YouTube, right? I think I would make the argument that it's a worse place, right? We have plenty of problems on Twitter. What if the world didn't have Twitter? I think it's better that we have Twitter.
Yeah.
Right? What if the world didn't have Facebook? There are problems on Facebook, but that's how I connect with my family, right?
Yeah.
But what if the world didn't have ByteDance?
Yeah. I mean, it's an open question. I think like the thing that Douyin has turned into at this point is not creating the social good that all these journalists, reporting news on Twitter is, but at the same time is a product that I think has a ton of value.
No, sure.
And people really enjoy for healthy and less healthy reasons.
And I love McDonald's.
Yeah.
Right? I love a double cheeseburger.
Yeah.
But I think that the argument that needs to be made, is if we're giving the kind of criticism to YouTube for YouTube stuff, like I would say,
yeah, there's not a lot of stuff on the other side of the ledger. Is
right?
What you're,
exactly,
is what you're getting
exactly, and they have the capability to do it, and they're not.
Sure.
So I wrote this piece about it. TechNode ran it. They knew it was going to come out of TechNode. Their PR had some problems with it, but TechNode stood by it. Huxiu, which is the site that I write for in Chinese, they ran it. It got a bunch of clicks and did quite well, but they never had any issues with ByteDance PR. However, In Chinese, Sai Fu Zhongwen, which is the Chinese version of Fortune magazine in China, right? So their Chinese language like platform, they will always run, unless it's a particularly politically sensitive topic, they will take my content and they will rerun it with my permission, with Hu Xiu's permission in Chinese. They ran it, and then they get a message the next day that it's from WeChat saying that ByteDance is accusing them of defamation for running that article, right? And if WeChat confirms it, they will be penalized, and they will have to take the article down as well. And then if they get penalized enough times, then their account gets taken down. They kind of they explained that it what the article was, and they defended themselves, and the article was not taken down. There was no issue with them.
Yeah,
but like, this is how ByteDance does. This is how they fight. Because we know it, because this is what they did with that YouTube blogger.
Sure.
And then this actually, the 2 days after that article came out, I wake up in the morning and try to get on WeChat, and I'm blocked. It says, I get a notification that says you have had a number of complaints about your behavior on WeChat, and I don't think I do anything particularly bad on WeChat, but you have been blocked, right? So I had to kind of go through all this process to get back on. But then you added me on WeChat that same day, and you got a notification that was like, "Don't trust this guy."
This
right?
guy's a criminal, right? It's the same thing you get when like you add a new foreigner who has like one friend on WeChat. Being like, this is a suspicious account. Like, make sure you know who you're dealing with.
Yeah. So, but it's like it's. I stand by everything that I've written. I think I did everything in an ethical way, and this is the way that they act. Yeah, which I think it's not. It's cool.
Probably unsustainable from an international expansion perspective. Because you do this enough times abroad, especially as your presence gets bigger, and people besides journalists who cover Chinese tech start to care about you, and then I think either they'll learn their lesson very quick, or problems will get very big very fast.
Hope so. No, but it pisses me off.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna try to that's my livelihood. Like if I can't get on WeChat, I can't work.
Yeah.
And they I don't know. And also it's that kind of garbage that journalists in China have to deal with all the time.
Yeah.
These people aren't covering sensitive, government or political things. These guys are making 8,000 RMB a month, right? Trying to just, cover, business, these businesses that are often doing really shady stuff.
Sure.
And these guys act like they're from the mafia or something,
Yeah.
You get stories of people who you get visits with people going to their, these, kind of thugs coming to their door. You get all sorts of threats, right? Like it's not easy to be even a business journalist in China. And it's because these guys play really, really dirty games with these guys, with journalists. I don't know. I think it's bullshit in my mind. Might have to bleep that. But I don't know. I got very upset by it. I'm pissed off. And yeah.
So turning now to a couple of examples of companies that haven't quite had the success that ByteDance is having abroad with TikTok. So LeEcho and BYD that you've also written pieces about. What's the stories with these two companies, and what do you think has gone wrong for them in their expansions abroad? Maybe start with BYD.
Well, okay. Well, BYD has actually had a decent amount of success abroad, but they've done a lot very quickly, and it's been messy.
So what's the company?
So BYD is, it's an electric vehicle company primarily at this point. We're most well known for being an electric vehicle company. They also make, traditional automobiles. But they have been making they've been making a lot of electric buses for different cities around the world, right?
You want money in the door, not going out.
They have supplied the electric bus fleet to Los Angeles County. And they... the buses function for the most part, but they've had quality issues. They've had a lot of credible accusations of mild corruption. They have a lot of times overpromised, underdelivered. For example, their buses have trouble going up hills. So the way that you can look at this is, and also they have problems with managing staff. right? So local staff, they'll do things that are often, at least in the U.S., would be considered, it's legal violations or just not the way that you treat employees in the U.S. So what you could say here is, oh, this Chinese company comes there, they bribe local politicians, they get no bid contracts, which they did, and then they lie about what they can do, right? And then they treat their workers poorly, right? Sure. That's one way you could look at it, and that's partly true. But you could also say, okay, well, this company is, it's not an easy expansion to do. It's technology that's developing as it goes along, so it's hard to make promises and know if you can deliver or not. So they probably overpromised a little bit. Auto workers in the U.S. are notoriously difficult to deal with. We could give them the benefit of the doubt, absolutely. But there's also there's a number of blips on the radar with BYD, right? They've had a number of different deals around the world where the quality of their buses have had issues, and then there was this issue earlier this year, which was super shady, where they agreed to sponsor the British football club Arsenal, right? So it was a big, expensive sponsorship deal where they would have, their logo around the stadium. They would have their logo on the chairs where the players would sit. And they announced that in the springtime, and then in July, I believe, they said that this woman who had been in Shanghai, kind of operating as a middleman for them and dealing with Arsenal, was committing fraud, and that she had a fraudulent chop, one of those stamps that the companies have on all the contracts in China. Sure. It was fraudulent, and she got sent to jail. Now, this is kind of weird because that's not how you commit fraud. She was paying Arsenal.
Yeah.
That's not how you're supposed to commit fraud.
You want money in the door, not going out.
Exactly. So there's something weird going on. And talking to people around who knew her and who had dealt with the company, she had been working as a kind of a quote-unquote representative of BYD for 3 years. So there's something and there's no way that they wouldn't have known about that. And speaking to other people who had been around that woman or BYD, it seems as though something doesn't seem right. Either they were trying to get out of the deal, which is quite likely, and we also don't know who her boss was, and that seems to be the big question mark. But it was either, and with a lot of these globalizing Chinese companies, or these global Chinese deals, there are a few different things going on. One to consider is leverage and debt issues and liquidity issues, and that right now, it's been well documented, this expansion of lending that's happened over the last 10 years in China, that there's been just a lot of money lent by state banks and in their shadow banking sector that has caused the corporate sector in China to be heavily over-leveraged. BYD is a private company. They're not a state-owned company. So now that they're trying to cut back on the leverage of their corporate sector, if you're a bank, it's much more reliable to lend to a state-owned company, even if you don't know if they're going to pay it back, than it is to a private company, right? So even if your credit line gets cut just a little bit, if you're already heavily leveraged, that can be a big problem.
Sure.
Right? So if you're BYD and that happens to you, what do? Well, you got to cut expenses, unnecessary expenses, like marketing, right? So what better to cut than a pricey sponsorship deal? So we don't know that that's what they did, but it seems like that it's likely that they were trying to pull out of that deal, and this was the fall person for it. The other,
too bad she has to go to jail.
Yeah, no, it's
Jesus
like,
Christ.
well, her family wrote this this WeChat post basically saying she didn't do anything wrong. They were kind of pleading on her behalf. I don't know, maybe she's been released. I don't know. But we can get back to Leeco.
Sure.
Which is, I worked for them as well, and this is kind of how I got my eyes open to it, because a lot of that was happening in that case. So I worked for Leeco for about a year and a half in one way or another.
And what did they do?
So they started off as basically the Netflix of China. And then they also started making phones and TVs that where they would sell them at below cost with the idea of being able to sell internet services on them.
Sure.
Right? It's actually
Clever.
That's Xiaomi's model, actually. Yeah. But Xiaomi is better managed, and Ligo went too far. They started making a car. They started, just going crazy in every direction. They opened a U.S. office that had 500 employees, an office in India that had almost 100 employees, a big office in Russia. They just did a crazy expansion until they couldn't get funding anymore for it, and it just collapsed.
Sure.
And it screwed a lot of people over. I would go to work every day, and there were protesters in the lobby just sitting there day after day after day trying to get the money that they were owed.
From salaries not being paid.
Or contracts. So like they're vendors or...
Yeah.
But there are also lots of employees that never got paid. And there were a lot of good people for the company. Like I know one executive who basically, there were salaries that weren't getting paid because Ligo didn't have any money, and this executive was paying people salaries out of her own pocket. So these are good people who would work who worked for him, but they from the very beginning, I saw it and it was like, what is going on? It didn't make any business sense. And when you get down to it, some of it's ego, that someone thinks that they can be the next Steve Jobs.
Sure.
Another thing is that all of a sudden lending they get access to capital, so they say, okay, let's max it out. And the other is that they're trying to get money out of the country, so they do global expansion. So they say, okay, well, for them and their buddies, they can get their money out. So there were a number of reports of top leaders at Ligo basically acquiring other assets that were not directly related to the business with money of the business.
Sure. So
the more that you're involved with the company, the more it's like, okay, well, this is not like, how do you represent a company like that? How do you stand behind a company like that and maintain your own integrity? Like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's tricky.
Yeah. So that was my situation with that. I just find that I have a lot of very good relationships and really admire a lot of Chinese entrepreneurs. But the environment in China for doing business and just how other podcasts you've talked about this more, but it makes it really disincentivizes, good behavior.
Yeah.
And it's kind of disappointing.
Because you see even good people with good ideas and good products seem to have to go down this line of thought. I mean, we did a recent show with Matt Sheehan who helped Kai Fu Lee write the AI Superpowers book, and he has this whole thing where the idea of the Chinese startup and tech ecosystem as this gladiatorial combat.
Yeah.
And on the one hand, if there are 10,000 Groupons that show up, like. The company that, it's a real forcing agent for good management and good for some aspects of like good operational management, product development because, you lose and there are 10 other companies right there to take your place. It's not like no one else is doing the thing that you're doing. And given the lack of IP protections, someone else is gonna take the idea that you have and run with it. So you're really going to have to operate and execute at an extremely high level, probably higher than anywhere else in the world. But there is this flip side to it, as you say, where these types of, less than above the board behavior ends up getting incentivized because there are seemingly no rules to these sorts of competitions.
Yeah, and there's plenty of situations where you have the anti-corruption campaign. So there are a lot of officials, I think, and a lot of business leaders who think that their days are numbered, right? Because the anti-corruption campaign isn't stopping.
Yeah.
Right? So if you're worried about your family, if you're worried about your assets or your own life, then what are you going to do? You say, I need to get my money out. I need to get, can I get my family out, right? And there are so many restrictions that one of the channels for doing it is a large firm globalizing. Right.
Sure.
So if you are an entrepreneur who's in charge of this company, and I am a political leader who has helped you get where you are, or can help you get further, I can come up to you and say, okay, I have $5 million that I need you to help me get out of the country, right? So, or I need you to help me buy a couple houses in London, right? You have to say yes, right?
Yeah.
But then what that does is how much are they focusing on business, and how much are they just focused? It distorts it into something that even if someone wants to do something very legitimate from the very beginning, it becomes very difficult to do so because of kind of just what the environment is at this point.
Yeah. And the irony is that, there is one belt, one road, right? And there's this whole idea of the Chinese government wanting these companies to become these global powers and sell products on a global scale and become globally competitive. But at the same time, with all this stuff mixed in, as you said, the business plans get trickier and there are two bottom lines, and it's not the happy two bottom lines that you hear about in the West, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right. So it becomes very counterproductive, where on the one hand, you do have these dreams of having every phone in South Asia being a Xiaomi, but at the same time, not to cast any aspersions in that company's direction, but given the atmosphere around these certain issues, you do get mixed up in the types of issues. You have no choice but to get mixed up in the types of issues that you were talking to.
But then also considering that, I mean, what some of these companies have accomplished is quite impressive.
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's turn to the happy Africa smartphone maker.
Oh,
maybe.
Transsion.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wouldn't say it's entirely happy. I mean, there's plenty of there. I mean, but no, that Transion's been very cool. It's very interesting to follow. I listened to the China and Africa podcast, right, with Copus Van Setten and Eric Olander. Very, very good. I highly recommend it. And they mentioned China Tech in Africa. And they mentioned Techno, which is I was like, what the hell is a Techno phone? Right?
Techno.
Tecno, I think.
Tecno, yeah, no H, yeah.
And so I looked it up and found this company, Transsion, right, who had, and kind of looked at some articles that have been written about them. They have, I believe, 2/3 of all cell phones in Africa, of all smartphones in Africa, are this Chinese company that no one's ever heard of in China, called Transsion, Transion. And I started looking into them, and I started kind of contacting their PR and some of their executives, and they're much more willing to talk than most Chinese PR that I deal with and executives. And it was really cool how they've, they went in there about 10 years ago, and they've just kind of slowly been planting seeds. They've developed a lot of local contacts and local relationships. They've localized their operations in Africa.
Yeah.
And they hire a lot of local talent, and they've really, taken hold of the smartphone market in Africa. Now, hardware is a difficult business to make money on, right? To really make a profit, and they're selling them as cheap as possible, but they're eating up market share. And if you're bullish on the future of African development, if all these Africans that are making $200 a month now and $1,000 a month in a couple of years, right? That expansion, consumer expansion, is good for you if you have their smartphones.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I was on campus the other day at the PKU Huawei info session to pitch graduating students to join Huawei. And one of the opening slides of this guy was a stamp from Cameroon, and it was this Chinese guy and a few Africans, and they were laying a pipe or whatever, and it was
what
and basically the idea was the Cameroonian government was so appreciative of what Huawei did for it that they made a whole stamp of them helping set up their thing, and it kind of gave me a weird yin yang, like a little white man's burden, but it's like China and we're helping our brothers in the South or whatever. But it seems like this company is really not doesn't really have that mindset, and are kind of meeting the customers on their own level and doing a really aggressive job of localizing. The thing that please.
Well, I am hesitant whenever there is such a stark contrast drawn.
Okay.
Because I'm sure there's good and bad at all these companies, or there's
one day.
But yeah, and that patronizing attitude is is definitely there. But yeah, it does seem like when I talk with them, they really get what Africa is about in a way, and they really understand the African market, and a lot of the African markets, all these different there's 50 some odd countries in Africa.
Yeah.
And all the complexities of it and the importance of localizing in ways that I was just really impressed by.
Yeah. So there was one product you spoke to about a camera that is specifically like tuned for African skin tones.
Yes, exactly.
And which is fascinating and something that you would not realize was an issue unless you really did some serious market research.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this fascinating, I think it was a Slate video talking about how like the way that Polaroid made their film in the 50s and 60s or whatever, and it's kind of stayed throughout today, was that dark skin tones would just not come out right, or like look too dark or too light, or the features would be gone. And just the way you shoot and the way you tune the contrast or whatever means that some skin tones are just given or look livelier than others.
Yeah.
And for them to not only realize that was an issue, but then build a whole product and make a whole camera, which is sort of aimed at fixing this market need.
Yeah.
I think really speaks to what the dedication that this company is doing to try to understand and fill what the African consumers want.
Yeah, and most of the phones the smartphones that we use are either developed by American or East Asian companies, right? Sure. So they assume that, especially in East Asia, right, everyone wants to be, you take the selfie, right? It makes you look more white. I have a Samsung, and it kind of automatically does that. Yeah. Like beautifies my face if I take a selfie, but quote unquote beautifies, which means make it more white. Yeah. So they've really jumped on the idea of like that there are different standards of beauty in Africa. Like, so how do they have basically their photo software on their phone design it in a way that it kind of enhances that in that way according to those standards, which is really cool and really thoughtful. And also they've localized their products in a lot of other ways. So they find ways to make it so that their battery life is longer, because not everyone can access electricity as easily as in Africa as elsewhere.
Sure.
They dual SIM cards so people can toggle their networks. They also try to make their phones as cheap as possible. So if you think about I was contacted by somebody after I wrote that article who works for a refugee assistance program, and he said, when we go to refugee camps, right, everyone's using a transient phone. Yeah. Because you can get it for $50. So if you're only making $100 a month, right? Like a lot of these, like the kind of people that would be in a refugee camp.
You're not getting a Huawei. You're not getting a Vivo, a Xiaomi. This is your product.
But that opens doors of opportunity for these people, and it's it's very cool. So I am very hesitant to be like to paint a picture of a company being saint-like. Sure. But it's cool that they do this.
It's not. I guess maybe the takeaway is like it is not impossible for a Chinese company to navigate these sorts of issues and figure it out just as well as companies in Silicon Valley has. I mean, there's no intrinsic Chinese-ness which is stopping good market research, good product localization.
Yeah, absolutely. And they they got in there and they were patient and they took their time and they really kind of they did it. I think one thing that you hear throughout that company is just, and I think it's such a basic thing, but it's been a problem for, obviously with a lot of American companies going abroad, with a history of European influence around the world, and with Chinese companies going abroad too, is like what you said, that kind of like patronizing attitude, or this attitude of like, just an attitude of disrespect, I think, in a lot of ways. Sure.
Which is absolutely something you hear in Silicon Valley.
Yeah. This idea of like, we have the knowledge, and we are going to improve their lives, rather than being like, getting down there and being like, who are these people? What is important to them? What kind of lives do they live? And what are some ways that our products, our services, our company can contribute to that? Yeah. And that's something that it seems that Transient is doing well. So kudos to them.
So let's turn now to your book project. Mm-hmm. So Geek Park.
Book is in the future. Right now it's an article project, but I want to write a book, absolutely.
Okay, so what is Geek Park?
Okay, so In the U.S., right, there's this famous, you have the PayPal mafia, right? So you have
Peter Thiel and
Elon Musk,
and
yeah. So you have all these guys were all involved in PayPal when it first became the company that it is now, and then they left and they went to start, to invest in Facebook, to start LinkedIn, to start Palantir, to start Tesla, YouTube, right? So much of what we see now is kind of these big names around around Silicon Valley came out of out of PayPal. In China, what we see is that a lot of these names come out of what I would call the Geek Park Mafia, right? So Geek Park is like a tech media outlet, kind of an incubator. They have these conferences. They're headed up by this guy named Zhang Peng, or Jack Zhang. But about 10 years ago, he was an editor at a magazine called CEO-CIO magazine. And
terrible name.
that was the English name. I don't remember what the Chinese name was.
Okay.
But under him, he had 4 journalists that worked for him. He also had started his own magazine called Business Value. He had 5 journalists that worked for him. 4 of them went on to become very, 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 big names. So we had the person who basically created Xiaomi's ecosystem, right? The Mi UI was a journalist for him, right? Victor Zhou Yuan, who is the founder and CEO of Zhihu, right? $2.5 billion knowledge sharing platform in China. He used to be a journalist for him, right? Another number of people who went on to be big, build up China's venture capital ecosystem, used to work for him. Hu Weiwei, founder of Mobike, right? She used to work for him. And they used to have these meetups in this basement in Beijing, where it was kind of an incubator before there were incubators, or accelerator before there were accelerators. And
do you want to date this?
This is probably 2008, 2009, 2010, right? So they were really into this idea of the future of the mobile internet. The iPhone had just come out, and Jack Zhang Peng, he also knew Zhou Hongyi, the founder of Qihoo 360, quite well. And they were very excited about the potential of mobile internet. And they liked kind of the philosophy and the user focus, these ideas of kind of like lean startup methodology. And they would have these meetups to kind of talk about different ideas for internet companies and things like that. And in that basement where they do these meetups, you'd have Wang Xing, the founder and CEO of Meituan, right, pitching Meituan. You'd have Zhang Yimin, the founder and CEO of Bytedance, pitching Bytedance, right? You had Lei Jun from Xiaomi, pitching Xiaomi, right? And so you'd had it's like billion-dollar company after billion-dollar company. It's one basement, a bunch of 20-somethings, sure. and now it's $200-300 billion, right? So, just hearing about I'm in Beijing right now, visiting and talking to different people. I had worked with and were friends with a lot of these people who kind of came out of that scene, and just talking with them about their backgrounds, it was always this Geek Park mention, right? So how'd you meet that person? Oh, Geek Park. How'd you meet that person? Oh, Geek Park, right? And I also noticed that oftentimes the founders or executives that I clicked the most with were from this background, right? These are people that used to be journalists, right? I'm a pseudo-journalist as well. And just having this attitude of curiosity, being able to kind of play with an idea that I think goes into product design and building a business as well. So I was talking with Xia Yongfeng, who is he used to be one of the journalists, and he is basically designed, or was he is the VP of basically the IoT, the whole ecosystem for Xiaomi. Designed that, built it basically himself amongst others. But he was telling me that one of the big transition moments of his life was when he wrote a negative story about a company that he did not disclose to me, but he wrote a critical story that he stood behind. And he had an editor at CEO-CIO magazine, the editor-in-chief, who had received a complaint from that company because they were a sponsor. And they were getting a lot of pressure to take the article down. And the editor meets with Xia, and he goes, okay, well, do you stand behind everything that you wrote? And he goes, yeah. And he goes, all right, we're going to keep it up there. Right. And about how this is this turning point for him where it's like, oh, like, well, if it's a good article, if you can stand behind the work that you do, then you should be able to stand behind it even if it's difficult.
Sure.
So later on, when he worked for Business Value magazine, which later became kind of Geek Park, which is Jack Zhang's magazine, Jack asked him, he said, you have 2 career paths for you. You can either be a really, really good journalist, right? And be a feature writer, things like that. Or you could be, move up the chain and be an editor and kind of, be more in a management position. And he thought about it, and he's like, no, I just want to be like the best journalist that I can be.
Sure.
Right? But so what he wanted to do was really just focus on just making something of really good quality. And he said that the things that he liked most were just to consume information, to kind of synthesize information, to find the themes in it, and then communicate it. Right? And he's like, then like I started working for Xiaomi, and I'm still doing the same thing. Right? That's what product design is, right? So it's finding out about your users, it's finding what they like, it's synthesizing the patterns that make a good product, right? And then making a new product. Right?
Sure.
So it's this kind of attitude that makes somebody a good journalist, it also makes somebody a good product designer.
Yeah.
But it's a principles-focused approach. So it's saying that as long as you're engaging the user, as long as you're, making something you can really believe in, right? The fundamentals will always be there. But if you're kind of going this way or that way to the whims of the market or, trying to chase, users, then you're not going to feel as good about yourself and you're not going to be as sustainable over the long term, right?
Sure.
And that's also what good journalism is, right? If you're going for clicks, you're not going to make good journalism, right? But if you're really trying to produce something good, you're going to do it. And I think that this is something that I've noticed with a lot of these folks, right? Yeah. That there's this very heavy product orientation that really causes the really good ones to stand out.
Yeah, and that has an origin in this kind of real journalism training.
Yeah, journalism and also just kind of a passion for entrepreneurship too, and passion for product creation and product design, user orientation. Like I've done a lot of work with Zhihu, which is that knowledge sharing platform, and I worked a lot with their founder and CEO, Victor Zhou, who's also one of these Geek Park guys, right?
Sure.
And the company has hundreds of employees. It's a $2.5 billion company. But I've noticed, like, if I answer a question or ask a question on the platform, I'll get a message from Victor that's like, "Hey, I saw you on I saw you answer the question," right? And so this guy is spending lots of time on the platform, still looking at how the platform is functioning, and who's on it, and this idea of staying focused on that core product that I think really. It makes the Chinese internet, these Chinese internet companies, kind of stand out and, really be kind of something that is, special, I think. Same thing with Mobike, I think, too. So, Hu Wei, she was a former Geek Park journalist, right? And kind of coming from this school of thought, I think. And you can tell with just the Mobike product design, Mobike makes better bikes than OFO.
Yeah. Because they weren't comfortable with the business model of more bikes for bikes, and you can really see it in Beijing nowadays that like the OFOs fall apart.
Yeah,
and every fourth bike you can't, the chain's off or it's something is rubbing against something else. Yeah. But it's interesting because I'm sure both companies did the numbers, and both companies thought their numbers were going to work out. But there was a decision at some point, which had to come down to a gut feeling: is are you comfortable with more bikes for cheaper, or do you really want to make these $200 tanks that aren't going to go anywhere anytime soon, and that you can be comfortable with 6 months or a year from now, you'll still be able to get on and ride.
Yeah.
And the decision that Mobike made, which is the one that seems to have paid off, was that building the higher quality thing and having it, live for a longer time and have your customers have higher satisfaction is the decision that was ultimately the right one, and that paid off for them with this, $2+ billion exit for them.
Yeah, exactly. And look what's happening with the OFO. I mean, they're a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
And I mean, but just if you look at the original Mobike, it was built it
was like 40 pounds. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, super heavy. It was built with aircraft grade metal, right? And the chain was covered or didn't have a chain.
Beyond chain. It was beyond. I don't know. It was. It could not get unchained.
Yeah, exactly. It couldn't get on. It couldn't get unchained, and there were no spokes. The spokes were like kind of thick metal or thick plastic, so that it was very hard to break it. Right.
Yeah.
It was something where I think Wei wanted, and she's explained this, that she from the very beginning she was like, I don't want this thing to break. I don't want to be creating litter. And now we've seen that this rush of cash and this competitive landscape it was hard to kind of maintain those principles. I think it's something that they're trying to get back to since the Meituan acquisition. And I think you also can't blame them, when you have the bikes everywhere. If you need market share, right, and if your success depends on market share, you got to flood the streets if your competitors are flooding the streets.
Yeah.
Right. But I think it's hard to.
The distinction, I think, is the design decisions and the logic behind the design decisions of what they were willing to spend and not willing to spend money on when it came to the actual bikes on the street.
Yes, exactly. And have you ridden the new ones? Those new orange ones?
They're great.
Yeah. Do you know what they called them when they were designing them?
Please.
They referred to it as ACO because the design inspiration is based off A Clockwork Orange.
Oh, Jesus Christ.
So no, but it's like there's this there is this passion that you see, I think, with these people from this background and this kind of similar way of thinking that I think really and it's what I like about China tech. So I'm writing about these. I'm talking with each of these different people who were there at that time, and kind of talking about how their own way of looking at the world, their way of looking at business, was inspired from that.
Sure.
So I'll hopefully have an article out soon, and who knows, maybe a book later on, maybe a podcast series. But yeah, it's what I'm looking into right now, and just kind of it's just fun to meet with these guys and to hear their stories, and it's one of the things that makes me feel good about the whole tech scene here.
Elliot, thanks so much for coming on China Econ Talk.
It was great to be here. Thanks, Jordan.
China Econ Talk is edited by Jason McRonald and Kaiser Guo and is a proud member of the Sinica Network from SupChina. For other great shows on China, check out the Caixin Sinica Business Brief, the Pan Daily Tech Buzz China, the New Voices podcast, and of course, the Sinica podcast, now in its 9th year. Until next week.
星星，时尚的精英搭配什么？看我的心情。